I know you're there. You finally found your computer.
Yeah, I'm here. So yes, I've got laptops everywhere. And I've got one just for presenting, just so I don't
Okay, well,
anything
that's
dirty
going
on
to
the
be
computer.
great. So share your screen, Aaron, and take it away.
All right. Well, okay, you guys should be seeing this now, hopefully.
Yeah, it's coming. Yeah, it's coming.
All right.
You're
So
ready to go.
there we go. Thanks, Magnus, for inviting us. And I know this is about smart products. We actually don't do any end products, but our focus is more where our expertise is, and actually that's about making development easier for IoT, basically. So we basically, just to cover some of the most biggest IoT developer challenges out there, and anyone who's doing IoT development know that it's really, really hard, right? I mean, I've been involved in IoT for about 15 years now, and I remember it all started with, AVRs that are 8-bit, and I mean, now we just saw the release of the Raspberry Pi 5, but that's not really an IoT device. It's more of a personal, small miniature computer. But we're still seeing, even with the likes of the new ESP32s, there's a lot of dev kits coming out. There's a lot of different hardware. You've got the new RISC-V CPUs coming out, and even some of the more legacy CPUs from Microchip, they're releasing new features. So we're seeing a lot of microcontrollers on the market, and there's really no universal way of actually dealing with building a product for IoT. And I mean, it's one thing to build a product around artificial intelligence, machine learning, and doing hand detection, which are all great examples. But to us, we see these as the application. But what we see is the difficult part for most people is actually, how do they actually build a sustainable and a solid foundation of a product without actually having to hire like the world's top 10 embedded developers, right? So basically, one of the things we've seen in the past is security is definitely always been a massive topic. And Rob Tiffany, who's the ex Ericsson IoT entrepreneur and the head of IoT, he basically said we created the largest attack surface on history. IoT was such a big boom. People just threw together devices, threw them out the network. I mean, we're now starting to see regulatory compliance come into play. There are going to be rules that people have to follow, but these things are quite difficult for a lot of people to say, look, I've got a great idea for a device, but while I may be a great machine learning person, or I may have a great idea as to the domain of what they want to build the product with, they get this bottleneck of saying, how do we actually build an application, and how do we deal with an environment where we can actually deploy our solutions, right? So we know that IoT devices, they're not supercomputers, right? I mean, a lot of people they want to try and use supercomputers, but the reality is that most IoT solutions are microcontrollers. And I mean microcontrollers, anything that's running, definitely can be a 32-bit ARM processor or a Cortex M33 or so. That to me is a kind of mid-range microcontroller. But these type of microcontrollers are out there, they exist, and they are quite challenging for a lot of people to work with, right? So I mean, the easy part, which I hate this, I say in this case, because the easy part is probably the easy part from the consumers or the people wanting to build products, is actually what they want to do with the microcontroller, right? So if they want to read sensors, they want to do some actuator control, they want to implement machine learning algorithms, do predictive maintenance, et cetera, that is really the easy part, right? Because there's a lot of companies doing tools to help them make that happen. And it's actually more aligned with their domain knowledge. The hard part is actually what I consider the eye of IoT, right? So it's when you start dealing with root trust, network communications, and it's not just about doing a HTTPS connection. There's a lot of things that go into it as well in regards to robustness and stability, data protection, reliability of data delivery. But more importantly, and this is what we focus on, is actually the focus of lifecycle management. And the key thing for this is being able to, without having to, redesign your product once you've got your proof of concept, we actually build a solution that people can use from scratch, so that from the day they start prototyping to production, it's exactly the same environment. And they don't have to worry about these things. They just kind of say, it just works, it's available, I can focus on what I do best, which is actually typically, working with machine learning and so forth. So the question is, how do we do this? I mean, we have a unique approach, and actually we've been talking to a lot of the microcontroller manufacturers, and one of them said to us, we haven't thought about this approach to doing security, and they were very interested, and they were still having ongoing discussions. But the principles that we have is that I wrote a white paper a couple of years ago talking about the Internet of Disconnected Things, which is kind of the oxymoron of IoT. But the reality is the only secure device out there is one that's unreachable, right? So the theory from us is what we typically see with IoT is that, people build a product and they have a single microcontroller. And what they typically have is they have, if they're doing some form of lifecycle management or working with a company that does OTA firmware updates, or even the built-in services that are provided by the microcontroller manufacturer, they have to compete with resources on the same microcontroller while doing what they actually wanted to do in the first place. So this runs into a lot of issues in regards to concurrency, having to timeshare resources. If you're actually dealing with something that was mission critical, and then all of a sudden the background daemon kicks in and says, hey, I'm busy talking to the network because I need to do my OTA update, right? Then that's going to ruin the experience of the, or even the development process of how you put things together. So you're going to run into problems. And the other thing that happens as well is if one of these applications crash, then it basically can render the whole device, bricked. That's it. Of course, it depends. There are higher power MCUs that have protection units and so forth, but a lot of the IoT devices out there don't have it. So if you get a failure of some form running on the same CPU, then your device is pretty much dead in the water. So what do we do different? Well, we say, okay, you can have your microcontroller and you deal with your sensors, your actuators. You go ahead and do your machine learning, do whatever you want to do. And then what we do is we say side by side, we'll put another microcontroller. And now that microcontroller, it actually is going to be responsible for all the communication, all the security, all the negotiations, sending data to and from the network. But more importantly, it also will be responsible for receiving firmware updates. And via a in-system programming environment, like either via ICSP or SWD or JTAG, we actually have the ability to have full control of that application dedicated microcontroller, such that we can say, let's just erase the flash. Let's put whatever you want on it. You can run one build with a bare bones environment. You can another run with RTOS. If you want to change to a JavaScript environment, you just put another binary. It's just a hex file to us. We do have a bridge between the two devices so that you can send and receive data. So that's a hardware bridge on the device itself. But we translate that and do all the encryption up into the cloud with a binary compressed algorithm, such that that's actually patent pending right now. And at the same time, we can also bring data from the cloud back into the device. So basically, from the programmer's point of view, working the product, they say, let's focus on machine learning, and I want to send this data and I want to receive this data, and I don't want to do anything else. I just want to focus on that key element. And basically through this, what we eventually get is effectively a hardware-based sandbox, right? So basically our microcontroller is the one that's exposed to the world, but we are actually experts in locking down our CPU, whereas the CPU that's actually behind us, those guys, they don't have any network, right? If they did have a network, it would actually be a local network, but they don't have an exposed interface unless they, of course, configure it that way. But of course, the great thing with this is you can run a Bluetooth network locally or a Zigbee network locally, such that you're not going to be exposed to the outside world. So you can actually run everything within your own little sandbox. Right. So, and the benefits of this, the great thing is when you start saying, we provide libraries and so forth, and one of the first questions you're going to get, they're going to say, well, can I run JavaScript and in parallel run an AI engine that's written in C or C++? Then the chances are there's probably we may have some interoperability, but there may not be. So the great thing with this is that, most of the OTA or lifecycle management stuff is built more on C and C++. But the great thing, because of what we've done, is we've isolated that completely away from the application microcontroller so that the customer of our customer can choose whatever microcontroller they want. Maybe there's a PIC18 microcontroller that's more suited than an ARM microcontroller. And, with all the chip shortage problems, that's been a major request that we've seen with some of our contacts over the last couple of years. Maybe they want to use a specific programming language, or they want to use a specific operating system. They don't want to go free RTOS. They want to go bare bones, and they don't want to deal with concurrency, networking, and so forth. So we give developers that freedom to basically choose this. right? So what we do as a company is, we've been around for about 7 years now, and our focus actually has been on building these solutions from scratch. So we're not the type that goes out and grabs open source and tries to stick it together. Our solutions are, as we say, secure by design. We've implemented a lot of things directly from data sheets. We've seen a lot of open source code where the libraries for doing networking are just full of bugs. So we've completely rewritten those libraries. And we've built a lot of services on top of those over the last couple of years, such as, secure data management, reliable data delivery, and so forth. And the great thing with this, is that right now we actually support about 500 microcontrollers. So this is a wide range of AVRs, PICs, a whole bunch of Nordic Semiconductor, and even the more recent SAMD microcontrollers all the way up to the SAMD 53 or SAMD E53s, which I know I've seen a couple of AI models been running on at the last embedded conference I went to. And of course, what we do is our focus is, of course, focusing on providing secure device lifecycle management, where we have a secure by design with the root of trust. We are network agnostic, so you just basically choose whatever network you want. We have reliable data delivery even when there's no communication. There's zero attack surface for the application CPU. There's secure firmware updates over the air for both the modem and the application microcontroller. And more importantly, there's the freedom of choice for the developers. And one of the things we've actually seen, which is quite nice, is the fact that you can go from prototype into production without having to touch any code. And that also, we've seen a reduction of market and cost for our customers. So in regards to code, as I said, we've written a lot of things from scratch. We don't have a very large code base, which is great. I know there's an article from Microsoft a couple of years ago saying less is more. You can always have millions and millions of lines of codes, but if you have to have someone sit down and do an audit of that code, that's going to take months. The nice thing for us is we've got about 100,000 lines of code on all of our stack, right? That's from client all the way up to the cloud. We do have a patent pending with our communication because we basically have examples where we've been able to run a device roaming around with second level GPS recording of position over about 7 or 8 months on a 500 meg SIM card, right? This is unheard of by most people we talk to, right? And from there, as I said, we've also built our system around to be developer friendly. So there's a lot of documentation for both how they can actually interface with it, but also more importantly, how they actually can build products. And we've built a little dev kit to help people get along. We've got one for an AVR and one for the SAMD or SWD environment. We call it the RIoT Shield. And we just recently signed an agreement with Arduino to become a gold partner with them. But I guess that's nice to see. This is a lot of people that say this is what they do and this is nice and so forth. But the reality is, proof is in the pudding, as they say. So for us, we have some real case studies. And one of our customers is actually SAS. So I'm sure you guys fly around. So SAS, and you see the little red cars driving around the airport. It's not just the little red cars, which are baggage carts. They've got everything from, staircases, or this, in one case, you've got a loader there in the picture. There's lavatory vehicles and so forth. So what we basically offer is we have a telematics device on the vehicle that's there for doing tracking of the vehicles. But not just that, it's actually used to automate the billing process, because ground service handling obviously sells services to different airlines. And this was previously done with pen and paper. And through the use of our device and working with the system integrator on their side, we've actually had the ability to do automated billing so that they can, have an effective use of the equipment, have more knowledge about where their equipment is being used. Do they need 10 heaters, or is it sufficient to only have 5, for example, stuff like this. And the great thing with this is, we have the ability to update firmware. A secondary mandate from SAS was the fact that they want to have safety and security on the tarmac. So updating the firmware was mandatory, because they have constantly changing geofencing zones to say, today is a bad day, so don't go in this area. Or if they drive a vehicle within the baggage area, the vehicle has to slow down to a certain point so we can trip a relay and so forth. We've seen accidents happen in the airport over the last 3 or 4 years. And I could go forever to another presentation talk about all that. But what we basically built for them is we actually made them a PCB board that had a dedicated microcontroller. And the 80 mega 2560 was sufficient at the time. And it was actually based on what they already had. And we added a off-the-shelf communications module that, we originally started with the GSM 1400, and now we've replaced it with the NB 1500. So that's basically LTE-M. And we also had we actually made our own custom modem for Alpha LTE Cat 1. But one application that's probably more applicable to what some of the conversations have been today, and where it actually makes sense for our type of solution, was with a company called Kamal, and they were doing predictive maintenance on industrial robots. So these are robots that, you know, in a car factory were always doing things, and they wanted to say maybe the ball bearings are shot, right? So they had a team of 10 data scientists, and they approached us saying, we've built our own hardware. You know, we've got 10 data scientists, and they don't know how to do any programming in terms of, you know, working with a Qualcomm modem or, you know, any form of communication. So we suggested to them, why don't you take an Arduino BLE Sense, which the device pictured in the bottom there, and that's a device that provides all the sensors. It provides a Nordic Semiconductor microcontroller Cortex M0 that had more than enough power to run TensorFlow Lite, and they were able to build models using just this off-the-shelf development board. And when it went into production and to do testing, we actually built them a board, so it was more of an industrialized environment. And the reality was that board was actually stuck on another PCB. And through this, just by doing this connection, we had the ability to actually deliver complete firmware, you know, updates over the air, so they didn't have to stick a USB cable in and so forth. So this was one of the use cases that we had, the second use case we had. But basically, from that, I'm going to be finished because I don't want to take up everyone's time, and I think I'm running out of time.
You do, but you do it very well, Aaron. So really good to listen to you, and a great presentation as always. I think if we have a question here, I think we have. Hold on a second. Our IoT, how much does it cost? Give it as an example with an added CPU.
Well, I mean, the example we have with the Alana case, we actually had the ability to just use an off-the-shelf board when it comes to communication. So we use the Arduino MKR series. So if you wanted to use Wi-Fi, that could be a $25 board. If you wanted to go 3G or NB-IoT, it could be like a €70 board. In regards to making a board, like making your own custom board where you don't have the ability to swap out a communications module, then you're only looking at the cost of an extra microcontroller and maybe a communications module, and those things are quite cheap. I mean, you could buy a Wi-Fi board for $25, so that's a microcontroller and the Wi-Fi. There are devices out there like the ESP32S3 that's a Wi-Fi chip that actually has the ability to write your own programs for, so you can actually do everything on the same device. So you can get one of those CPUs for about $3, just as an example. It depends on how flexible you want to be. I mean, the cost could be, the additional BOM would be just as much as, you know, $3 or $4. But if you're doing something that's more off the shelf, then of course you're looking at buying retail products. So it's going to vary depending on the use case and how you actually use the product. So in our cases so far, we've been focusing on the ability to be able to swap the networking dynamically. But if you wanted to build a board that had something fixed, then you could drastically reduce the bill of materials.
Great. Thank you. I don't think we have any more questions. Please unshare your screen, Aaron. Let's thank you so much to you know, all the presenters.